Tonight, how did it go so wrong for Anthony Albanese and his voice? I'll talk to one of the two people who've done most to make sure that on Saturday that voice goes down. What was their secret? Plus, Peter Dutton says there's no place in our society for pitiless anti-Israel protesters. We should cancel the visas of haters at Monday's rally in Sydney. But what do we do with the academics at Sydney University who whipped it on? One even telling the mob he had no tears, and I must warn you, a graphic video coming up, he had no tears for the murdered, raped and kidnapped Jews. 150 of them now, the kidnapped ones, settlers he called them.
I'm not going to stand before you and shed tears over the settlers.
What on earth are they teaching at that university? And why was a Labor minister staffer at that protest as well?
He's very sorry that he went.
Also tonight, a mystery solved why the Albanese government was right to ban extra Qatar Airlines flights. But why hasn't it said so? And I'll talk to one of the climate extremists who invited the ABC on a dawn raid on a gas executive's home. How on earth did that happen? Maybe you'll let us know. But first, the voice. Now, this is my last show before you vote on Saturday. Vote on the Prime Minister's disastrous crusade for a voice that so divided this country and wasted nearly $400 million of taxpayers' money, and which will fail. Now, this whole crusade has been so destructive, and yet this voice was the very first promise the Prime Minister made the night he became Prime Minister. He promised to back in full the Uluru Statement, which doesn't just include this voice, by the way. An Aboriginal-only advisory parliament in our Constitution also includes a treaty as well.
I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and on behalf of the Australian Labor Party, I commit to the Uluru Statement from the heart in full.
It was mad. His very first promise. That's how he started his victory speech. Before mentioning anything about cost of living or how about keeping on the lights. Instead, a plan to divide Australians by race. But I've got to confess, I actually lost faith in Australians. Sorry about that. I lost faith because, in fact, over Christmas, I told my wife I'd have to resign this year because I couldn't understand this country anymore. You see, the polls back then showed nearly 2/3 of Australians backed the voice. Now, how could it lose? I mean, we had 13 of our top 20 companies. They jumped on this bandwagon and said, vote yes. Big corporates like BHP and Rio Tinto and Wesfarmers, they poured millions into the Yes campaign. Qantas flew the Yes campaigners around the country for free. All the big sporting codes also told their fans, vote yes. Celebrities said, vote yes. The big religious groups, Christian and Muslim, said, vote yes. Universities said, vote yes. Everywhere you looked, you saw these vote yes signs as well. Almost no ones go shopping in a Big W store, a recorded message, vote yes. I mean, it was unbelievable. Almost no one dared say no, of course. The bullying was so bad. I mean, the abuse. You're a racist. And it was so intimidating that the Liberals even back then, last year, they didn't dare say no either. Not then. But then something amazing happened. Over the past year, the polls have shown that the voice went from 2/3 support to now approaching 2/3 against, according to the very latest poll. And I find that stunning. And not just stunning, I find it astonishing and inspiring because it shows that Australians can't be bought off with money and they can't be frightened off with this bullying. People just looked at this idea and they thought, and the more they looked and thought, the more they decided this voice was actually wrong. It would divide us and it wouldn't do much for Aborigines either. And it clearly wasn't because they were racist, because, you know, they actually started this year wanting to give the voice a go. Now, two people, above all, have helped voters realise it's wrong and that they can dare say so. Both of these two were Aboriginal, which is devastating for the Voice campaign because it made it hard for them to call no voters racist. One, of course, was National Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, who voted today and said it so well why this voice must be voted down.
I don't believe we should be divided along the lines of race in our country. We have seen around the world the destruction of division and what that means in other nations. We shouldn't be constitutionally enshrining that within our democratic country of Australia. There are other absolute ways to move forward to improve the lives of our most marginalised. The other angles that we haven't taken yet, that this proposal does not provide whatsoever. In fact, this proposal provides nothing.
And the other no campaigner who did so much to kill the voice, well, I'll talk to him in a minute. But today I heard one yes campaigner who, to me, symbolised the biggest fraud about this push for a voice, which is this fake idea that, well, we need a voice because Aborigines aren't being consulted when they're being consulted already. They're being consulted. It's this person.
Education and investing in our young people is something that our elders and my generation are really worried about. And so we want a platform to talk about those things. We have solutions.
We want a platform to talk about these things. In fact, that woman is the head of Cape York Partnerships. It's formed by the father of the voice, Noel Pearson. And no Aboriginal leaders, in fact, talked more to politicians than Noel Pearson. In fact, Pearson is one of the leaders of the Yes campaign. Pearson and his various schemes have been given at least $550 million. That's more than $500 million from governments to do what he thinks works. And that shower of money includes what that woman runs. I mean, it's incredible. And if these schemes didn't work, it sure isn't because Pearson didn't have a voice or a say in how all that money was spent. So that alone tells you that the voice is based on a fraud of an argument. And it's a fraud of an argument that Prime Minister was still pushing today, saying that the voice of 24 selected activists, well, it's needed because finally then the government will have a body telling them what to do for Aborigines.
An advisory group that's non-binding but will allow Indigenous Australians to be heard by Parliament and government and to be listened to.
In fact, Albanese has claimed often that without the voice, nothing will get better for Aborigines. In fact, they might even get worse.
If governments simply continue to do the same thing and insist they know better, then things will get worse.
But as I say, it's all a fraud, it's a con, it's a hoax. And it was Linda Burney herself, the Indigenous Australians Minister, who blew the lid off this fraud back on February 13. I wish more journalists had paid attention, because that was the day she announced a big new partnership. And this partnership, she actually said, was the next step towards closing the gap. It was a national agreement on education, health, housing, domestic violence, life outcomes, the whole thing. She said this agreement would now bring real action, real change. And this agreement was with and co-signed by Pat Turner, head of the Coalition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peak organisations. And this group, I mean, representing so many Aboriginal organisations, 70 big ones, community controlled, right? It's been negotiating deals with governments for years to close the gap, with Scott Morrison as well. So the question is this: if the Albanese government already has Aboriginal groups advising it on exactly what it says it needs advice on, closing the gap, what would a voice do that's different? Well, I think a lot of voters have been wondering that too. Well, to me, the answer seems absolutely clear. Unlike Pat Turner's council, a voice written into the Constitution will actually act as the de facto and unsackable parliament of an emerging Aboriginal nation with a mission to demand sovereignty. In fact, it was Burney again who once said this voice would indeed be, and I'm quoting, a vehicle to negotiate a national treaty. What about stuff on the ground and health and schools? A treaty. And that means that Anthony Albanese's claim that the voice is just a simple change is just the biggest lie of all. This isn't about consulting Aborigines. That's done already. It really is about dividing this country by race, and it seems that Australians have now seen right through it. And on Saturday, we'll know. And yes, the other person that with Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price has been so devastating in this debate, who's made Australians see through this voice and dare to say no to it, is Warren Mundine. Warren Mundine joins me now. Warren, thank you so much for your time. Look, you've been a leader of the official No campaign. You've worked with incredible energy for so long. My God, you've copped so much abuse, Warren, along the way. I know that at one stage you looked like you were going to crack under it. It was so nasty. Only 2 days left of this grueling marathon you've been on. How do you feel?
I'm feeling okay, actually, because I'm out there travelling all over Australia, meeting, Australians and people out there and chatting to them, and they give me the energy that actually keeps me going. And so I'm feeling really good. And I'm very proud of the Australian people.
And you've got business interests, though, Warren. I know that, and you've got so many fingers and so many pies. Why did you decide to devote so much of your life instead to this?
Well, it's very simple. This is about the Constitution. This is the basis of all the laws in our country and all the policies. And this is what the High Court, makes decisions about, whether it's constitutional or whether it's not constitutional. And so this is about who we are as Australians. It's about who we are as people and what sort of nation do we want. And what I was seeing was, here we are going to go down this road which puts race back in the Constitution. It is divisive, and also it's built on a lie. This lie, and you said it so eloquently in regard to that we have committees there, we have advisors, we have thousands of them out there, and they get paid good money to do this job, and so they should. But the problem is, and this is what we've got to do after the Voice election on Saturday, is we all got to come back together and make this work and fix it. You mentioned money previously about the $500 million. Well, we want to know about where the billions of dollars have been spent, why hasn't it got the outcomes that we should have, and then we can start building and making sure the money's better spent and gets clear outcomes. Otherwise, why are we funding these people? And this is one of the first things we want. The second thing we want is education. No? Sorry.
Well, I think things that you've been hammering for years now, Warren, including how about breaking up that sort of corporate socialist kind of mantra for community, collective land ownership and things like that for Aborigines out bush, and talk about individual initiative. I can't wait to see what happens there. But when you signed up to fight this, did you think you would win? And did you think, well, unless an Aborigine is seen as leading the No campaign, it's going to lose?
Well, you know what? I have great faith in Australians and great faith in this country. And they're not mugs. They want a country where everyone is equal, everyone is free, they have liberties and freedoms, and you're able to have a job and get a roof over your head and feed your family and your kids, and that can have a better life than you, and your grandkids that have a better life than them. And so I always had the faith in the Australian people. So all we had to do, I believed, was get out there and talk to the Australians out there, talk to the public. We didn't lay around in leather lounge chairs and smoke cigars and drink cognac with the big end of town or talk to all the other big people. We just went out and had a beer in the pub or a lemon squash and whatever, cups of teas with nice old grannies and everything. And that's what we did. And look, the way things are looking, and of course we won't know until tomorrow night at the earliest, the Australian public has responded to that.
What lessons should we take from this campaign?
Well, the issue we've got to take from this campaign is, the corporations have got to seriously look at themselves. Really seriously look at themselves and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to influence people's lives and everything like that. Why don't you actually get back and do what your shareholders want you to do, which is to go out there, run a business, people who invest in their business get a return on their money. I think there's going to be a lot of questions raised at some of these AGMs, and I think these managing directors and CEOs and chairmen of boards and directors need to have a serious look in the mirror Sunday morning.
Absolutely. And also the people that thought that abuse would win it, and I'm thinking here of the Financial Review, among others, which to its shame ran a cartoon by David Rowe of you, Jacinda and Peter Dutton walking past Nazi-style standards with Hitler on it. That kind of stuff, that's got to end. That cannot be part of our debate any longer. Warren Mundine, my congratulations to how you've conducted yourself with great dignity and class. All the best for Saturday. Thank you. There's now been call by the terrorist group that's behind that attack on Israel for supporters around the world to do something tomorrow to show heroism. That is ominous. And again, I say the Prime Minister's really been caught out on this crisis. It's the attack by Islamic terrorists from Gaza, ordered by Hamas, that left 1,200 Jews dead, most of them civilians, the mass rape of women, the taking of hostages, including many children. And this has now spilled out to Australia with an ugly anti-Israel protest in Sydney, ending with dozens in the crowd chanting, "Gas the Jews." And a Muslim man has now been charged for allegedly threatening to kill 4 boys who had an Israeli flag. And it could even get worse. Like I said, Hamas, the terrorist group that runs Gaza, had ordered that attack as well, declared tomorrow a day of general mobilisation in the Islamic world, and also, it said, among the free people of the world, like Australia. Hamas says it's a day to rally support, offer aid and participate actively to demonstrate love for Palestine. It says it's a day tomorrow for sacrifice, heroism and dedication. So the risk of terrorism is real. But the Prime Minister still has not convened a meeting of the National Security Committee to discuss all this and more. For 2 days, he was busy selling the voice in Uluru, but Albanese has tried to shut down this criticism with this excuse.
What I don't do is foreshadow or either past, present or future talk about National Security Committee. The way that I deal with National Security Committee and national security issues is to take them seriously. We don't foreshadow when NSC meets. We don't produce the minutes of NSC. That's the way that national security, diplomacy and intelligence should operate, not as a political game.
Straight out of the Dan Andrews playbook, right? Oh, I can't discuss that. I can't discuss it. Turns out to be complete bull, because Albanese in the past has been only too happy to discuss talking about exactly these meetings.
On Thursday, there will be meetings of the National Security Committee. We had other briefings through the appropriate bodies, the National Security Committee. We have met for many, many hours at dozens of meetings over the National Security Committee. All the members of the National Security Committee, we met on dozens of occasions. I convened a National Security Committee meeting. We had NSC that afternoon.
I think you got it. Hypocrite. Meanwhile, Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, was today calling for the deportation of anyone here on a visa who was part of that vile anti-Israel protest on Sunday.
If there were people there who were on visas, they should be identified and they should be had their visas cancelled. They should be deported. People with that hate in their minds and their hearts don't have any place in our society.
Fine, but what do you do with these people, all academics and staff of Sydney University who were there as well? Some had actually promoted the protests, and one, a casual academic, even addressed it, saying he had no tears at all for the Jews who were killed and raped. This man should not be teaching our children.
I'm not going to stand before you and shed tears over the settlers. Palestinians have every right to break out of our cage. We have every right to fight back.
And joining that man were other Sydney University staff, including at least 2 senior lecturers of the hard left, one of them saying this so-called resistance was justified, saying that after Jewish civilians were massacred.
So we're staff from Sydney University, and we're from the group of Sydney Uni staff that support boycott, divestment and sanctions. And we're here out in support of justice for Palestine and freedom for Palestinians. And we're saying that resistance is justified.
Well, the Palestinian people are an Indigenous people. They are victims of colonialism.
Joining me is Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce, there are about 8 staff, academics and staff from Sydney University that posed to that rally. Should they be stood down?
Well, look, the only reason they're going out to a rally is because of the absolute carnage, the beheading of children, the rape of women, which was conducted by a terrorist organisation, which was Hamas. And it was basically they unprovoked went across, murdered people at a music festival, murdered people in a kibbutz, took hostages, took them back across the border. They say they're now going to murder them as well. These people weren't protesting prior to that. They're protesting after that event. And so we've got to say what inspired their protests. Well, the trigger was Hamas, this terrorist organisation's murdering of other innocent civilians. And now we have the repercussions of that. And I don't want to see any innocent person killed. Not one, not one. It doesn't solve anything. But we have to understand that Hamas were the people who basically threw the match into the tinderbox on this one. And now you're reaping the whirlwind, aren't you?
I find it absolutely disgusting, absolutely disgusting. You see a massacre like that, kidnapping, rapes, and the first thing you do is march against the country of the victims. It's serious. Now, the fact that the Prime Minister, I just went through that Hamas call for action, a day of action tomorrow worldwide to support them. The fact that the Prime Minister hasn't called a meeting of the National Security Committee yet, is that significant?
Look, and I think I hate to say it, Andrew, you did such a good job. When the Prime Minister says, look, I'm not going to tell you about the National Security Committee, it's secret, and you go, yeah, that's plausible, that's plausible. And then you see that actually that's the one thing he does all the time. He always tells people what he's doing when it works for him, when it works for the Prime Minister. When it works for Anthony, he tells everybody. And when it doesn't work for Anthony, he comes up with these weasel word excuses, and that's exactly what he's done. Now, this definitely requires a National Security Committee meeting, most definitely. And I was Deputy Chair of the National Security Committee for years, so I've got a rough idea how it works. And the reason is because you have to look at the implications of what happens in a global context. Most especially, you have to look at how you get Australians out of the affected area and home. You also have to ask the questions, what internally in Australia could this trigger? What internal ramifications could we see in our nation? And unfortunately, the other day from the Opera House, we started to see them. And now we hear about other protests that are going to happen on Sunday. We've got to be really eyes open on this one, because this could get very ugly. And what we don't want in Australia, in the egalitarian nation of Australia, is the issues that are pertinent to overseas being played out in Australia in a violent context. People are allowed to demonstrate, they're allowed to say, express their opinions. But if violence arrives in Australia, then whoever's violent first loses. Well,
Barnaby, the Albanese government has been attacked for helping Qantas. I'm going to defend it now. Attacked for helping Qantas make big profits by banning extra flights from Qatar Airways. But, as we've discussed, not explaining exactly why it's done that. Just said vaguely on national security. But let me show you why that might actually be true. Qatar Airways is owned by the Qatar government, which lets the Hamas terror group's leaders, the guys that ordered that attack, lets them live there. And it's said that Israel was solely responsible for the Hamas attack, which had hundreds of civilians slaughtered and many women raped. Now, in contrast, Qantas's partner in the Middle East is Emirates. That's owned by the United Arab Emirates, which blamed Hamas. Totally different take on what happened, saying the attacks and the firing of thousands of rockets were serious and grave. And it said the Emirates were appalled that Hamas had taken hostages. Does that justify banning Qatar when it's so close to Hamas and helping Qantas and its partner Emirates instead?
Well, it would certainly add to the argument if the decision was going to be made now. It's going to be subsequent to what happened in the Gaza Strip. It most certainly would have great weight. But this happened prior to that. And no one gave any statement about, well, we're worried. And then, you know, I was part of the National Security Committee that said Hamas was a terrorist organisation, not just, it was just on Globo, one block, a terrorist organisation. So there would have been no problems whatsoever prior to this to say, look, Qatar Airways is involved with Hamas and Hamas is a terrest organisation, therefore we're blocking Qatar flights. But,
well, let me just interrupt, Barnaby, because in fact, Qatar has been home for Hamas for a long time, and that is an issue. It is an issue.
Well, why didn't they say it? They should have told us. They should have said that. I mean, what is to be lost by actually, if that was the reason, what is to be lost by actually saying that?
Yeah, I know. That is the mystery. Why didn't it say that? Or maybe it hadn't, even this hadn't occurred to it. I don't know. Barnaby Joyce, thank you so much for your time. After the break, documents now reveal that Daniel Andrews ignored a plea from our Foreign Affairs Department to ask China to free journalist Cheng Lei when he went there as Victoria's Premier on a mystery trip. And the New South Wales Police Minister, meanwhile, is accused of calling Jews "you people" and telling them to stay away from the Opera House during a tribute to Israel. To a disturbing story broken today by my colleague Simon Love, Sky's Victorian political reporter. It makes Daniel Andrews, the now former Victorian Labor Premier, look even more dubious. As I told you last night, China finally released Australian journalist Cheng Lei after nearly 3 years in jail on fake charges of leaking national secrets. She talked to the Prime Minister on a release.
Hello, Prime Minister. What an honour.
But back in March, Daniel Andrews took a mysterious and last-minute trip to China with no journalists, no business leaders and almost no staff. What was he doing? Well, Simon Love put in a Freedom of Information request, finally got the documents he was looking for, and one is a briefing note for Andrews saying many Victorians are troubled by the ongoing detention of Cheng Lei and the matter should be noted by Andrews in his meetings with Chinese officials. But Andrews refused.
I did not meet with any officials that would be seen as part of the justice system, for instance, and it's not my practice to cut across what can be very complicated, very delicate consular matters. That's never been my approach, but again I acknowledge that this must be an incredibly challenging time for her and for her family.
Joining me is Sky News presenter James McPherson with the Late Debate here on Sky at 10 p.m. and Evelyn Ray, writer and commentator. James, what is going on there?
Well, Andrew, this just confirms what we've always known. Daniel Andrews was Premier of Victoria, but not Premier for Victorians. If ever there were 3 Victorians who needed representation, it was Cheng Lei and her 2 children. You've got a Victorian woman wrongly imprisoned by the Chinese Communist Party. You've got 2 Victorian children missing their mum. All Dan Andrews had to do was make representation. He said it was not his practice to cut across DFAT issues. We now know DFAT actually asked him to get involved. They even gave him the talking points. It wasn't like they were saying they expected Dan Andrews to secure her release. They were just asking, make sure you mention it so the Chinese know whenever they meet with Australian officials, this will be on the table. It's an important issue. But as we now realise, and I suspect always knew, when it came to Dan Andrews' interests and the interests of Victorians, he always chose the former.
Evelyn Ray, it's just another disturbing insight into how close some Labor politicians seem to be, to me at any rate, seem to be to China and not wanting to upset it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know from history that Dan Andrews had a lot of ties to China throughout his time as Premier, but I actually think perhaps maybe he didn't bring it up because of the sheer embarrassment in the hypocrisy of lecturing China about human rights, considering that he locked down his state the most of any city in the entire world, in the entire history, during COVID. So maybe he was showing a little bit of humility or something, because it would have been quite hypocritical of him to bring that up. But he is quite deficient in those areas. So I am hesitant to believe that is the cause, but it would be a nice thought, wouldn't it?
Have you met Daniel Andrews? Humility, embarrassable. I don't know about your theory. Meanwhile, the New South Wales police minister there is accused of misleading Parliament when she gave this reply to a question about advice that she gave to Jewish leaders in phone calls on the day of the anti-Israel protest that was planned for the Sydney Opera House, which was going to be lit in the colours of Israel. Here she is.
My question is to the Minister for Police and Counter-Terrorism. Did you or did you not personally tell any Jewish community leader on Monday that the Jewish community should stay away from the CBD of Sydney?
Minister.
Did you do that yesterday? No, I did not.
In fact, James, Sherry Markson today reported that sources familiar with calls that Kathy had made with Jewish community leaders, including the head of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, said she had advised them not to go to the Opera House, and even said maybe it'll be easier if we don't light up the Opera House to protect, quote, you people. Now, Kately denies that she misled Parliament, doesn't actually say anything about the you people comment. What do you make of all this?
Well, look, if she has misled Parliament, then she must resign. But the position she has is untenable, because you've got Chris Minns promising to light up the Opera House as a way of reaching out to a vulnerable Jewish community, reassuring them you're part of us, and you've got his police minister undermining him in word and in action. Her words, you people, were entirely inappropriate, creating distance with the Jewish community, the exact opposite of what the Premier was trying to do. But on top of that, she was asked by the Jewish community to contain the Palestinian protest to Town Hall and prevent them marching on the Opera House. She evidently told them that was she didn't have the power to do that, which is evidently not true. It was an illegal protest. That's what police are for. They're there to enforce the law. So she's undermined everything that the Premier was trying to do. I don't see how she remains as the police minister under those circumstances.
And Evelyn, if she indeed said that the way to overcome problems with this mob that was descending on her, anti-Israel, some of them eventually shouting "gas the Jews," was to actually cancel the demonstration of support for Israel. I mean, seriously?
Yeah, it has done her absolutely no favours at all. You police crimes, not victims or law-abiding citizens. And I say this as someone with a law enforcement background. I am abhorred by how this whole thing was responded to. It was only a short while ago that the Australian government were trying to introduce laws to ban the swastika and all the Nazi symbols, but apparently gas the Jews is a grey area. It's utterly ridiculous, and we should be ashamed of ourselves. And if recent history has shown us anything, is that the police haven't been getting it very right lately.
Evelyn Ray, James McPherson, spot on. Thank you so much for your time. After the break, one of our regular guests has had a scary insight. He's met one of the Hamas terrorist organisers and is asked that man what he's really after. The answer is, you better wake up. I'm saddened that so many Greens politicians particularly, and some people in the Labor left, seem to have little idea what we're actually dealing with Islamist groups like Hamas, which ordered that slaughter in Israel. It's like, well, of course Israel can make peace with these people. Of course it should just, let open the gates of Gaza, let Hamas followers stroll right into Israel. And so a staffer of federal Labor frontbencher Tanya Plibersek just went along to this anti-Israel demonstration in Sydney on Monday, right after that mass murder, like, yeah, of course.
He certainly didn't go with my approval. He's a uni student who works 2 days a week in my office. He went to the rally. As soon as I found out, I rang him and told him he shouldn't have gone. He knows he shouldn't have gone. He's very sorry that he went.
clean up in aisle 7. Not many people have talked to Hamas, but one of our regular commentators, Amy Horowitz, has. A couple of years ago, he was driven to a secret location in the West Bank, I believe it was, to talk to Hamas organisers, who made it very clear that all Israel is Palestine and only violence would give it to Muslims.
Palestine is Haifa, Palestine is Jerusalem, Palestine is Tel Aviv, is Beersheba. That's Palestine.
We call all of this Palestine, as the Bible says. It's Palestine. This land is called Palestine.
Is it the duty of every Muslim Palestinian to redeem the land through jihad?
It is the duty of every Muslim, not only Palestinian, to redeem this land.
Is there any way for you to redeem Palestine other than jihad? Is there another way?
Give me a suggestion.
I don't know. I think no, I'm not in your position.
Okay, there are no alternatives in the world.
Joining me is Amy Horowitz. Amy Horowitz, thank you so much for joining me. Who is this Hamas guy, and why did he agree to talk to you?
Yeah, so a lot of what I do is often undercover. This guy was a mastermind of a number of major terrorist attacks across Israel, including the infamous Passover bombing, which killed, eerily similar in some ways to what we saw in this attack here, killing a number of people, including Holocaust survivors. The same thing was repeated over and over and over again. First of all, they're not looking to make peace. They're looking to wipe out all of Israel. All of Palestine is part of their purview of what their land is. They are not going to rest until they're not talking about the West Bank and Gaza. They're talking about Tel Aviv and Beersheba and Haifa. And also, what they never refer to Israelis. They always refer to the Jews, right? Their plan is to kill all the Jews. All the Jews are the ones they want to wipe out. It's not about the Israelis, the Israeli oppressors. And that was a theme that kept going over and over. So it was fascinating, frightening, all in one time. Just exactly how I like it.
Well, the agenda, I thought, was made explicit. The grab I've just shown makes that clear. They don't want peace. They just want the whole thing. Israelis, Jews gone or dead. Now, I watched your whole video. I noticed there a couple of times you try to appeal to him, to the human in him, as it were, jokes and this sort of stuff. You got nothing. You got nothing. He seemed like a total ideologue.
Yeah, I always try to humanize my subject, even if they are evil, even if they are despicable. My greatest skill set, I think, is not my interviewing prowess or the comedy. I think my greatest skill set is when I'm sitting in front of somebody and not smashing them in the face with the lighting equipment. That's the toughest job that I have when I'm doing this kind of thing. And certainly that was the case with him. It was very difficult to keep my cool. I always try to again, humanize them so I could have the conversation. And man, there were no jokes that I could make that were going to crack a smile. This guy was all business, and his business is the business of death.
But what do you feel about the chances of the hostages in the hands of Hamas, knowing what you know about them, knowing what they've been capable of doing so far, and also knowing the support that you're seeing in the streets?
Yeah, we're being real, and it breaks my heart to say this. I'm not sure a single one of these hostages are going to survive. I don't know how they can. Look, Israel has spent much time and resources trying to find these tunnels and destroy them, and they've had very little success. This is why we would all assume that the hostages are in these tunnels. I don't hold out any hope that any of these hostages will come out of this thing alive, unfortunately. And by the way, I say that knowing that one of my cousins has two of her friends were kidnapped at that rave in southern Israel. So I say that with a very heavy heart.
I wish I had something to say to counter that, but I don't. Amy, you also had a pro-Palestinian protest in New York after this massacre. They were chanting slogans, from Jordan to the sea, that's essentially calling for the destruction of Israel. that they were doing this after seeing the sort of videos we've been seeing about what Hamas has just done. Your thoughts?
The glee that they were chanting after seeing the images that they saw, the gleefulness in their eyes that they were able to see this attack on Israel. Look, if you ask any one of these people, one-on-one, man-to-man, and say, you happy this happened? I'm telling you, every single one of those protesters will say, I was happy. I was celebrating, right? And if you look across, look, this is a typical of the Arab world, the Islamic world, the Palestinian world in particular. When an attack like this, when Jews are murdered or Americans are murdered, 9/11, what do? They pass out candy and sweets. This is their MO. Look, even when Israel or the United States has to take lives, and sometimes civilian lives are taken by accident, right? Because that's the nature of war. You don't see a single American celebrating. You don't see a president gleefully going on TV recounting the amount of deaths, the butcher's bill with happiness. We do all of that work with a heavy heart because we know it's necessary. And that's a difference between us and them. They take pride in killing civilians, and it makes us, it saddens us to take lives.
It's so true, I'm afraid. There really is a different moral calculus operating here. Ami Horowitz, thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure, Andrew.
And after the break, the ABC keeps claiming it did not collude with global warming activists on a dawn raid on the home of a gas company boss. I'll talk to one of the protesters now who asked the ABC to come along and got arrested. I said before that the ABC has got far too close to climate extremists, and I suspect misled us about that. And I'm now going to talk to one of the protesters it was in cahoots with. As I told you on Tuesday, the ABC's Four Corners this week reported on a radical global warming group in Perth that had already let off a stink bomb at the headquarters of gas giant Woodside, forcing an evacuation. And for this report, Four Corners was there from the start of the group's preparation and rehearsals for another protest.
They've invited us to their rehearsal. We don't know their exact target.
ABC says didn't know the exact target despite devoting a big crew to the operation. Go figure. But as it turns out, the target was the home of Woodside boss Meg O'Neill and her family. And Four Corners had a camera actually in the car to record a dawn raid on it.
It's August 1st, protest day.
Do you know where you're going, Jesse? Yep.
I should tell everyone we're going to touch down in about what? 5 minutes. Yep.
Probably right on sunrise, I reckon.
Anyone have any final words?
Oh, yeah.
Bye to the National Union.
I'm just very, 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 very proud.
Yeah, bad luck for them. Police were a step ahead and they arrested the activists the instant they got out of the car. Joining me is one of the men they did arrest, Jesse Noakes. Jesse, thanks for your time. How did the ABC come to be in on your operation? Did you invite them or they invite themselves?
Andrew, terrific to be with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here with your audience tonight. And can I just say what a fabulous platform this is for our little campaign to continue getting the word out about Woodside's Burrup Hub and the catastrophic threat it poses to the safety and security of our only home.
Please, Jesse, can you
just answer the
question?
Absolutely.
How did the ABC come to be in on that operation? Did you invite them?
Well, of course I invited them. Absolutely. I after a series of some months of negotiations and discussions in relation to the terms and conditions of the access that was afforded to the ABC, they were invited in to the Disrupt Burrup Hub campaign to get front row seats on the true picture of how power operates in Western Australia, which is to say with the West Australian Police Force, counter-terror cops, acting effectively.
Was that your pitch?
Yeah, I mean the pitch was. The pitch was
this front row seats. We're going to do this.
Well, I mean, no, I didn't discuss any specifics. There was no need to. There was no kind of consideration as to just how close they would get to the thin screen separating Western Australia from a failed police state. I had no concept that the only people who were tipped off about the true location of that protest on that fateful Tuesday morning were the West Australian Counter-Terror Police, who had been camped out overnight in the home of the Woodside CEO.
You've misunderstood my question.
Please.
I'm asking you, what was your original pitch to the ABC? What made them think that's worth sending a reporter over, that's worth hiring getting all the crew together, that's worth putting in a week of work or whatever it was? What was your pitch?
Well, it's a story I've been working on for a number of years, actually, Andrew, and that is the true story about the pariah petrostate that Western Australia currently consists of. It's a captured state where the cops...
What I'm asking, Jesse, I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with our connection. I asked the question, what was your pitch to the ABC that made them devote all these resources? What did you say to them? You can get what?
You can get the full picture of how power operates in Western Australia to protect Woodside and their toxic Burrup Hub project at the expense of future generations, with the full collusion, cooperation and support of the West Australian Government and the West Australian Police Force. And may I say, Andrew,
I didn't need you to tell them
more
that.
than delivered on that promise.
With this operation, what were you offering? Were you saying, look, we're planning a big thing, why don't you come on board? Because there they were, they saw your rehearsals. Did they know you were going to go to someone's home or office?
No, the only people who seemed to know that long in advance were the West Australian Police, who, as I mentioned earlier, were camped out overnight at said home, tearing themselves away from the homes of dozens of climate campaigners they've been invading on a regular basis over the course of this year so far. The ABC were promised a bit of colour, a song, a dance, perhaps. They were given, fairly exclusive and impressive access to the rehearsal for an unnamed protest at an unnamed location.
So they must have known something was up, right? They must have known something was up. They see you mixing paint, loading paint guns, all that kind of stuff. And you say to them,
yeah, and then they've read the reports about this campaign and its activities.
Yeah, but when they saw this rehearsals, they must have had a clue. Paint, it involves paint. You were telling them, we are going to do what? You've got to get up at dawn, before dawn, in fact.
Yeah.
What did you tell them that you were going to do?
I believe it was roughly a sunset touchdown. About an hour before bounce down, I informed them that we were off to a location in a rich seaside suburb of Perth. They were encouraged to follow us, come along for the ride. As you would have seen from that video, I was in the driver's seat.
Suburb, home,
by the time we arrived,
someone's home, obviously. It must have been someone's home.
Well, we spent the previous few days.
Area.
Yeah, and I mean, most buildings are either someone's home or someone's office. As I alluded to, they'd spent the past few days filming people in their own homes, and subsequently, following the brief sojourn to the home of the Woodside CEO, or outside the home of the Woodside CEO, they returned to the home of a young mother to watch her being raided for several hours by the same counter-terror police.
Right, okay. So they must have known you were going to a home. They must have known from your preparations and what you told them, the address, you were going to someone's home. Don't you think it's a bit rough for a gang of 4 or so people turning up to someone's home at dawn? I mean, gee, if I did that to you, you'd jump a mile. If I turned up with 4 of my mates with a spray can and God knows what in my hands. I think it's pretty lousy. Look, we're out of time.
You're more than welcome.
I'd like to hear your response, but we're out of time. Jesse Noakes, thank you so much for your time, mate, but that's it. Coming up next, Chris Kenny. But from me, good night.